It's Rocket Attack. USA, USA, USA. An Eisenhowerian white guy reads us the encyclopedia entry on Sputnik as we're treated to lots of dazzling FX shots of bleeping satellites. At a top-secret Pentagon meeting of something called the Central Intelligence Group, I guess the assistance of the CIA isn't going to be gratefully acknowledged at the end of this thing, a dolorous fellow with an associate's degree in military defense explains the threat posed by Sputnik in not overly complicated terms.
The whole purpose of a world satellite is to find the answers to these questions. The first country to obtain these information will be able to fire a successful missile within 6 months. You may as well answer it, General. That's all I have to say.
Despairing over their satellite gap and expecting an unprovoked ICBM attack on New York, the Army brass proposes not only redoubling their effort to launch their own satellite, but also slipping an agent across the Iron Curtain under cover of night to keep an eye on the Reds. Once in country, John, our manly spy, makes his way to Moscow to contact an American sympathizer, Tanya, who's been getting intelligence from a boozy general with a loose tongue. First, however, he must sit through 1958's answer to hardcore porn in a kinder, gentler fire-eating routine, 2 acts that together clock in at roughly twice the length of a Neil Peart drum solo. At last he gets Tanya alone, where he learns she's managed to pick the philandering general's brain handily. That's the good news. The bad news is she's only been able to accomplish this at the price of her own virtue.
Last month I became the mistress of the Minister of Defense. When the pig gets drunk, he talks.
What a setup.
John, considerate and understanding soul that he is, discusses Tanya's sacrifice only in the most delicate of terms.
I'm sorry. I got rid of him as fast as I could.
Oh, don't worry about me. I'm okay. You look like you got the worst of it.
And though you'd think she'd be weary of getting pawed at, she succumbs to his debonair advances. Meanwhile, back in Washington, freedom-loving military minds despair over how our politicians would rather spend money on frivolities like food than more important things like instruments of mass death.
Time? We have no time. Had we half the money that was appropriated for such worthy projects as cheese price support, we would have had our ICBMs long ago.
I know, but you realize what a peacetime general it's up against.
As Tanya and John worm their way into the Russian psyche, nerdy guys in warehouses try to design and test a working ICBM. In a third thread, we peep inside the Kremlin to learn that, lo and behold, the Ruskies are planning an attack on New York, making the Pentagon's guess an uncannily fortunate one. It's looking grim for the good guys as the Americans fumble their missile tests. This nixing deterrence is an option. The Yanks opt for sabotage. A British agent tells John that Tanya snuck off to the secret missile base, and after a few twists and turns, she, the Brit, and John all end up there, even though they all insisted they'd be better off alone. Will they succeed in sabotaging the missile? If so, will they escape? If not, how will the basically disarmed Americans respond? You could stay tuned to learn the answers to these exciting questions, but my guess is you'll be folding laundry or playing with your dog by this point, rather than watching this damn thing. As so often happens with Mill Creek movies, there's some intrigue with regard to when Rocket Attack USA was made. Its official release date is 1961, but the date on its credits is 1958. This delay must have been pretty disastrous for the movie. See, in '58, Americans were pretty spooked. It was commonly thought, and not without reason, that the Russians were wresting the initiative in the arms race. By '61, though, the panic over Sputnik had largely settled down. The U.S. now had satellites and ICBMs of its own, and the technological contest had shifted into the arena of manned space travel. U.S.-Soviet relations were hardly peachy, and the prospect of nuclear annihilation was still plenty real. Be that as it may, the specific problem Rocket Attack USA wrings its hands over had largely been solved. The movie's main value is as an attempt to wrangle with the concepts of deterrence and mutually assured destruction that were later to make us all so alternately skeptical and miserable. It was popular to refer to those Cold War concepts as, quote, doctrines, but this seems like far too highfalutin language. These principles are more counterintuitive than complex. Deterrents held that each side in this pseudo-conflict needed to amass enormous stockpiles of doomsday weapons to discourage the other side from doing the same. Mutually assured destruction held that any nuclear aggression needed to be answered with an unbridled response. This allegedly discouraged either side from striking first, but if one did, it would be incumbent on the other to pointlessly retaliate. Otherwise, the MAD doctrine, the one the first side had just discredited, wouldn't be seen as credible. You can see how much sense this made. Anyway, Rocket Attack was uniquely situated to explore the Cold War's loopy logic and thereby beat out later classics like Dr. Strangelove, Failsafe, and On the Beach. Too bad the movie's just too goddamn hard to accomplish any of this. In fact, Rocket Attack is so bloody awful it's caused me to rethink the political paranoia films of the era in general. Here's what I mean. I've always doubted the received wisdom that in the classic alien invasion movies, Earth versus the flying saucers that came from outer space and the like, the invaders are stand-ins for the Soviet collectivist hordes. If someone wanted to make an anti-communist movie, why not just make an anti-communist movie? Why the unnecessary intermediary of space aliens? Well, Rocket Attack USA suggests a couple reasons I'd not thought of. For one thing, the movie makes its agenda far too obvious to be convincing. You're so plainly being manipulated into thinking that nothing could be more important than throwing money at ABM research in a panic, that you're tempted to root for the Russians just to be contrarian. Funny thing is, not only was ABM technology unworkable in 1961, it's still unworkable today, 50 years later. Another reason to use Little Green Men for your red baiting is that it adds an element of transcendent mystery and lowbrow fun. This movie lacks both, its phenomenal dreariness being summed up in Monica Davis's joyless performance as Tanya. Her character is plainly written as sad and stoic. She can scarcely endure being the piggish general's reluctant lover, but soldiers on for the distant cause of freedom. In execution, though, she just comes off indifferent. At times, she stops acting together in favor of reciting, as though she'd literally memorized her lines just a moment before and planned on forgetting them right after the scene was done. The whole movie's mood is like this. The one time it nearly musters legitimate tension, when the Russians are prepping their rocket and we're about to learn whether Tanya and John's attempt at sabotage worked. The makers managed to snatch irritation and boredom from the jaws of suspense by slathering the scene in 10 straight minutes of blaring alarm sirens and grating beep-beep noises. Like Atomic Brain, Rocket Attack scarcely rates as a full-length movie, with its 68-minute running time. But also like Atomic Brain, Rocket Attack can't even fill this without larding itself up with fluff. In short, this film was so unnecessary that its own creators didn't even seem that keen on making it. More's the pity. A decent chronicle of American society in the brief period between Sputnik and America's answers to it would have been a useful addition to the movie canon. But Rocket Attack falls so short of this that really the film might as well just not exist at all.